Hi everybody and welcome to today's MediaWorks Masterclass, where we're going to be talking about all things SEO and tech mastery. So there's going to be a real focus on the tech elements of SEO today. I think on the back of the context of this is on the back of a really successful, more general SEO workshop that we delivered a couple of weeks ago now, where we had sort of 250 people attend the session and multiple sort of connections afterwards, and questions and queries came through. We knew we couldn't keep up to date or keep on top of all the questions that came through and respond in the way that we'd like. So we decided to build out a 4-part series, which I'll tell you a bit more about as we go through. Again, today we're going to be following the same format where we offer a complimentary SEO audit on the back of this. The SEO audit will focus more on those technical elements as we go through. But I guess without further ado, my name's David Norris and I'm the Group Operations Director here at MediaWorks, and I'll be hosting the masterclass today. Jack?
Yeah, so I'm Jack Minott, the Organic Search Director. Again, co-hosting.
Co-hosting, that's where we're
the
at.
masterclass today. And yeah, taking you through everything. A few aspects of technical, which I think are the more fundamentals, which we can obviously cover in half an hour.
Yeah.
And then, as David said, obviously then picking up with everybody post masterclass to then tackle the audits and kind of get under the hood of some of the websites.
Fantastic. So as you can see, we've put on screen sort of the schedule that we've got around how we've broken this down. And again, it's obvious why we've done it this way. So Masterclass 1 will be focusing on tech today. We're focusing heavily on all things tech and optimizing your digital infrastructure. We've then got a further 3 sessions where I guess we're breaking up the routine now, Jack, where it's not just Jack and I, it's actually other colleagues from across MediaWorks. So we have Ross joining us to talk about all things content. We've got Owen then coming into Masterclass 3 talking about our approaches to digital PR. And then finally, we're talking about the future of search with our CTO, Dan Hogan.
Okay.
So again, exclusively for the people signed up today, we do like to offer something as a follow-up to give you really, hopefully useful insights that you can take away. So we've got discover how your website is performing. So I guess what I would say is if you register in the link via the chat, you can click on it on the link that's being shared now. But what will happen is we'll ask you a number of questions in there. And the reason behind that is we want to make sure that we're driving actionable insight. So we're not just doing something very broad. We are getting more bespoke as we go through this series. So we used to offer just a general SEO audit, but we really are deep diving into these areas, and hopefully we'll inform you more about what we're seeing in the technical space today.
Exactly. Right. So on to our maturity model. So for those of you that were attended last time, obviously this is our generalized maturity model, which basically takes us through our SEO strategy and how we like to kind of progress those. So obviously we'll be talking about tech today, but just as a reminder, we start with tech, move on to on-site content, move off-site, and then advancement. And again, for those that kind of remember that slide a couple of slides ago about the flow, our actual masterclass series is obviously following this exact format.
Yeah, and it follows this format, Jack, because this is how we conceptualize SEO across MediaWorks, isn't it? So we always talk about really understanding those technical elements, then move into that sort of on-site content piece, and then really progressing into off-site, and then obviously the advancement elements. So we wanted to start in the most logical place. So we start at the beginning, which is for us the technical aspects as we go through today.
And today we are going to be just covering off, again, those real fundamentals and understanding, what crawling indexation means. And then, the hot topic of the last however many years has always been site speed, core web vitals, and how we do that. I think we've really positioned this masterclass as the fundamentals and understanding the concepts, rather than it being, change this bit of code or do this for your exact CMS, just because there's just so much nuance out there.
Yeah.
I mean, even we talked about one CMS, there'd be different versions of that CMS, different themes, different setups. So in this way, I guess, we will be talking about the concepts, and then, like we said, those audits will then get under the hood a little bit more and how we apply those concepts. But obviously the hope today is that we understand what those fundamentals are, and then you apply those fundamentals within the tech stack that you have.
Yeah, and I think that's why the audit, we do ask for a number of questions, because I know, Jack, you and I have spoke to a number of clients and prospects this week alone, where again the answer in a lot of instances would be it depends. It depends on what your tech stack is. It would depend on how you're approaching this, what your CMS is, etc. So for us, that's a really nuanced piece, but we're going to cover a number of really core elements of all things technical today.
Exactly.
So I guess the context that we always start with is Google operates as a business. You know, I don't want to get into share prices and what's been going on with tariffs and all the rest of it, which I know we could spend a lot of time on. But just to go back to what Google really is about, is Google's sole aim is to provide a market-leading user experience within Google search, whilst generating revenue through paid channels. We all know that Google is coming under threat through other, I guess, what we class as search platforms, whether it be things like people using ChatGPT to search, or whether it be TikTok searching. So it's really about, for Google, probably more than ever, probably more than any other point in the last decade at least, they've probably had to really think about ensuring that if you're utilizing or using Google search, that you're served with really useful information back from that. So you're getting the experience that you want. And we've seen them evolving and changing the way that the search and the SERP appears for a number of years around that user experience. And obviously all of that is whilst protecting the revenue that they generate through paid activity. So we all are aware of the advertising element on Google and how paid search operates within that. And again, we'll be doing further masterclasses on that. And we've talked about this as an agency many a time. But it's really important to understand that really user experience aspect.
Yeah, and that's it. We don't want to give the game away for the later sessions, but it is, AI overviews is, massively rampant at the moment. We're seeing across our own data, across our clients' data. And it's just one of those things where, there isn't any kind of paid element to that. But I think, as we all think, how long is that going to last? And eventually they will introduce some level of paid activity into that feature or into some sort of AI mode, which obviously they're trying in the US as well.
So I guess Google's biggest cost, which is probably what people, I think, often don't think about as a user when I have conversations with people, is the cost of actually crawling the internet and scraping that data is absolutely massive. And I think that's one of the challenges that, for example, a ChatGPT is really struggling with right now. And it's one of the reasons that sort of ChatGPT isn't as recently up to date as Google, because they're still battling with how do you scrape all of the data that's happening live and pull in like that information into a place. Google have the infrastructure to do it, but it's a massive overhead in their business right now in terms of how they pull the data, the energy required to do it, and ultimately the data power that's required to do something like that.
Exactly. And then when we relate that to technical SEO, as we said kind of last time, technical SEO really is about reducing that friction, reducing that cost for Google. And again, there's that commercial value for them for every site or for every domain or website on the internet to be quick, light files, light image sizes, all of that kind of thing. There is a commercial benefit, and obviously we do see the benefits in the search results as well. But it's understanding we are helping them do their job better.
Yeah, I think from a technical perspective, if you think of it is there's the demand from the user to have a brilliant user experience, but then also Google from a supply perspective has got to manage their cost in terms of supplying that amazing user experience. So technical for me is any way that you can reduce that friction and make sure that sort of you're helping Google be as easy to engage with as possible from your website's perspective is a massive advantage and something that Google will reward you for.
Yeah, exactly. So basically after this section here, we're going to be going through crawling indexation, starting with crawling, and actually what that means, and again, the concepts for that, which we'll dive straight into. So kind of what is crawling and what does it mean, and what do we what's the definition of that? And effectively, it's when Googlebot is visiting our website, our pages, either via the sitemap or via the internal links or external links from other websites on the site. But we have to be aware that crawling is not to be confused with indexing, which we'll obviously cover a little bit later. But it is the process of how Google discovers new content. And actually, again, when you release a new page, release a new product, release a new service, when it's crawled, that is the first step in that page returning in Google search results. Then we come on to a very core concept, which again, we tried to say another analogy, and I like to talk about librarians and books quite a lot, but I think it's just a great way of understanding, and it is about crawl budget. So crawl budget, in a very simple term, is actually how long and how much data Google will take from your website at any given time. So your website isn't constantly being crawled, isn't being crawled every day. Well, in some cases it may be, in some cases it won't be. And that really comes down to your content quality, your authority, and all of the metrics we like to talk about in SEO affects kind of crawl budget. And, you know, again, if you compare like an Amazon to a small retailer who might have a local footprint in a town, obviously Amazon will be getting crawled every day or maybe every hour of the year, whereas that smaller retailer who, you know, isn't as authoritative, doesn't have as much content, might be getting crawled once a week. And the way you can check this is through your log files and log file analysis. We won't touch on that too much today, but you can do it that way and verify actually when you're being crawled and what's being crawled, more importantly.
Yeah.
But to really summarize that crawl budget point, you know, the way that I've put into a story here is, you know, Googlebot is a librarian and your website is the library. Effectively, each page within that library in that website is a book. And, you know, Google's job as a librarian is to go through and index all of those books and understand, you know, what sections are where, what's about what, and actually what topics are relevant and not relevant. And, you know, like any job, you're only going to work a maximum of 7 to 8 hours a day, potentially. Yeah. And that's that full budget. That's 7 hours Googlebot has in your library or on your website a day, or maybe not a day, a week, to go through as many books as it can to understand what's happening. And really, when we're optimizing crawl budget and crawling, what we're doing is putting in places like signs to say these books and these pages are about this, or we're fixing shelves so you can easily take them off, or giving, you know, Google a cart to cart books around. That's really what we're doing, is optimizing that process of getting around the website, getting around that library to get those books and understand what they're about.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. That point at the bottom, I think, is around like Google or the librarian in this example will also come back to read favorite books in that instance, or go back to the favorite website, because that's where they're getting that most useful information from. And again, from the user experience, that's why there's keyword volume out there, and Google uses that as a way to find, right, okay, these are the popular terms that people are interested in, so we're going to really focus on driving the user experience in those areas. And that for them is the really key indicator around where do you put your time, energy and effort.
Exactly, and that is exactly that. It's that energy out, value in for them. And like I said, you mentioned a massively great point there about internal kind of linking, and actually, yes, we always say it, your priority pages should be the ones that I reference the most, and they'll be the ones which, again, getting visited the most and revisited and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think this is, for me, is one of the things that we often talk about, and I think it is overlooked because it's not the sexy bit of SEO, if you like. It's not what people see, but it's such an important fundamental element. If you don't get this right, like, it doesn't, I wouldn't say it doesn't matter, but it absolutely minimizes the quality of, you know, the relevance of your content or the DPR activity that you're doing. Because if your website isn't crawlable or is proving difficult for Google will just go and find other places and other sources that will make it much more easy to do it. And that is why this has been a ranking factor in Google's algorithm since day one.
Yeah, exactly. So really, ways in which we can optimize crawl budget then. So the top one is technically not true, but technically is true at the same time. So we have use canonicals and then remove duplicate content. So canonicals are a way that we obviously flag to Google, flag to other search engines that the content is similar or the same on another page. And you may use it on a variant product, you may use it on impagination, you might use it on a blog post to another blog post in another language, or there's, again, multitude of reasons. The reason why I put it in here is because canonicalizing something doesn't mean it's not going to get crawled, but it does deprioritize it, and it means that Google probably won't crawl it as often. So it basically allows us to have a page that's accessible without having to take it down or return the status code or anything like that. Then obviously removing duplication is obviously an obvious one, because it means that Google won't spend time crawling pages which it's already seen or, you know, doesn't need to look at. Then we have things like fixed broken links and redirect chains, again, that wasted time of kind of requesting other pages which may not exist or just aren't available. But then the other two, which we can proactively do, is prioritizing internal linking. As we just said, linking to the pages which are the most relevant and we want Google to see the most. Again, that will then it should force them into those cycles and finding those pages more often. And then the final one, which is a big one, which again, where any tech audit will probably highlight some level of issue, is our XML sitemaps. So the sitemaps we submit in Google Search Console, and that's where we say to Google signpost, here's literally your town plan of our website. Here are the pages we want you to visit. And that's why it's so critical that the pages within those are the pages we want indexed, we want visits from, and are actually going to drive us value.
Absolutely. And I think, again, thinking about this, I think things like strong internal linking, to me, it's almost like giving Google a map and an up-to-date map. When you're in your car and you're driving along and the sat-nav doesn't do the diversion piece, when you can see the traffic on the road, you get frustrated because you're sat there losing time, burning through fuel, etc., and not going anywhere. And that is probably, again, a good way to think about sort of site linking and internal linking in particular.
And one of those where, again, well, some of this may seem not abstract as such, but where do I start with this? I think the classic is Screaming Frog. Screaming Frog's an SEO's kind of Swiss Army knife, if you like, and this is the bread and butter of that tool in terms of crawling, emulating Google, and again returning to us, analysing that data if something's accessible, if it's not, how often it's linked to, that kind of thing. So relatively easy and inexpensive to check if you don't have something like that.
So indexation, we've sort of touched on indexation as we've gone through crawling. They sort of come hand in hand, but are very separate activities. And indexation really, in a nutshell, Jack, would be around how does Google actually then read all of that information? How does it then store that information? And how does it make sense of that information to ultimately the end user?
Yeah, exactly. So we put on this slide, crawling is about Google visiting and kind of reading the page, and then indexing is actually how Google can decide to store that information and process it within the index to rank it. And I think something that we always say is really important is just because the page is crawled doesn't mean it's going to get indexed, doesn't mean it's going to get shown in a position which we might be happy with. So it's about understanding that first step is that crawling element, and then the indexation is really what we're going to touch on in probably our following masterclasses around like content quality, authority from external links, and really that semantic value that you might have on site. But it's just to say that that crawling aspect is the beginning. And the way in which we really kind of define this is you use Google Search Console. You can actually punch in a URL in the top search bar, and Google will tell you if a page has been crawled, if it's been indexed, and where it is, if it's live on Google, if it's not for any particular reason. And really that's your benchmark of what's happening, because it's one of the few times that Google gives us a very clear answer on what's happening with that page. Unfortunately, if there are errors, it doesn't always tell us why, but it does tell us at least if it's there, if it's been crawled, and if it's known to Google or can be shown on. So again, that Search Console, which again, I would hope that most, if not all, websites are using, or people that are on the call. And then it is about managing indexation. So much like how we can manage crawling, indexation is managed in various ways as well. So again, hopefully everyone will have heard of like no index. That's no index tags. Again, we place those on pages, which then say to search engines, you crawl this information, you can use this information to visit other pages, but just do not return it in the index. Canonical tags, as we spoke about a few slides ago on crawling, while this has, it has limited impact on crawling, on indexation, it should have quite a high impact. Again, we're telling Google this page is relevant to this page, or an exact copy on one of those. Again, it's worth saying that those two tags are only inferred to Google, so Google can ignore them if it feels you're using them inappropriately or they're being used as an error. So while we use them, it also has to be correct and has have a rhyme or reason as to why we're doing it. Then the third one there is low quality and thin content. So again, if your page has an FAQ question and then 2 lines of text, that's the whole page, Google may see that as not answering the query and will say, you know what, yes, I can see that page, but we're not going to index it because it offers no real value. And then, as I've just kind of explained there, really it is that Google Search Console point that we can really monitor and understand how Google's understanding our tagging and understanding our content and our indexation. via Search Console.
Yeah, and it's such an important tool, that, isn't it, in terms of, you've mentioned other tools such as Screaming Frog, etc. But I think it's often overlooked, sort of having a look in sort of your Google Search Console to see what Google is actually indexing and not, because again, just because it's being crawled doesn't mean it's been indexed.
Yeah.
And again, understanding why that might have taken place.
I think it's one of those as well, again, not to shoot myself down, but it's one of those where there's so many technical tools out there, so many technical pros, so many clever technical people.
Yeah.
But it's definitely one of those where you can get so much extreme value, but because it's free, it's accessible,
Yeah.
and potentially, again, it comes across as a very not meaningless data unless you understand what it means.
Yeah.
Like you said, it gets overlooked and
Yeah.
just not as well utilized, I don't think.
Yeah, I would agree. I think for anybody thinking about technical SEO, like Google Search Console needs to be an absolute fundamental element of something you're reviewing on a regular basis. So Core Web Vitals, I feel like this is like a throwback to me, because we used to talk about sort of Core Web Vitals. It was something that was sort of really bigged up by Google about probably 2 to 3 years ago now is when we really started talking about this heavily. And I feel like it's in all of our audits, in all of our conversations, proposals with clients, something we speak about on a regular basis. But I think understanding Core Web Vitals and really not just the binary element of pass and fail in Core Web Vitals, but actually some of the more nuanced elements of, so what does that mean as an output, what we're going to cover next?
Yeah. And I think it's one of those where, again, there's a lot of talk in the industry. There has been, like you said, over the last few years, David. It's one of those where we see it as and it is a lightweight ranking factor. And we will come across as to why that is in a second. Well, yes, it is a ranking factor, and Google has explicitly said it is. There is that element of, we've got it on the slide there. Companies, developers, people in businesses, marketing managers, just chasing those 100% or those high scores.
Yeah.
And really seeing that as the holy grail of SEO, which again is very easy because, unlike anything else in SEO, it's completely measurable and it gives you a 0 to 100 score. So it's very easy to attach our kind of efforts onto that.
Yeah.
But as we put there, content relevancy still outweighs that page speed point. That content relevance, that content authority, your general digital footprint will still outweigh that page speed element. That's not to say it doesn't impact things, but that's not to say websites should be super slow in favor of content, but it's just to say that's there. And really, like we said, we'll come on to in a second, is that these scores really should be indicators of good user experience and good engagement on a website. Yeah,
like I always say, we've got, for example, clients of ours that are performing amazingly on SEO, but still struggle with Core Web Vitals because of the way that the website's set up, for example, and don't have 100%. It's not like everything that ranks position 1 has a Core Web Vitals score of 100%. It's just not the way it works. So I think understanding the nuances behind it's really, really key.
And then we have the few metrics on the bottom, which again are good to understand. So we have like LCP, which is largest contentful paint. Again, I love an analogy. An analogy for this is if you're sat down for dinner at a restaurant, the largest contentful paint is literally how long it takes for you to place your order for the main meal to arrive. It's not the starter, not the dessert. It's literally the biggest piece of content to arrive for you to get stuck into. You've then got first input delay, which is basically, you flick on a light switch. How long does it take for you to flick that switch for a light bulb to come on? And that's, again, when someone clicks on something, how quickly does the website respond to that input? And then cumulative layout shift, which is CLS, which is then actually, are things jumping around, and the measurement of things, again, as they load into the page. Again, the classic is you might be on a homepage of a website, you go to press to buy shop now, and all of a sudden the video loads in and your phone's playing some random tune at 99 volume and you're like an idiot in front of the office. So one of those. But yeah, the core idea is really for Core Web Vitals is better user experience equals kind of fewer bounces or more engaged visitors. So less frustration equals more time on site, which equals more engaged users, which is then stronger user signals to Google. And really, again, reinforcing that the website is delivering content of a high quality, delivering an experience of a high quality, and really pushes users to that state.
So I guess we've covered like a lot there in terms of crawling, indexing, and then also core web vitals. But from a recap perspective, Jack, I think it's important that we do talk about the core concepts.
So yeah, those core concepts, as we discussed, is core. Well, Google is a business, as we all know, and SEO is there to reduce their cost. You know, we cannot drive them any revenue. However, we can reduce their bottom line. As you know, for any business, you reduce their bottom line, they're more than happy to take that as a value add. Crawling isn't indexing, and both need managing. So like we said, that crawling piece is the very start. Can things be crawled? Can things be seen? And then the indexation of it being returned in Google results. Again, do we want that page seen? Do we want it returned? Do we want that product variant to be indexed? That kind of thing. And again, both then contribute to crawl budget, which is a finite resource which Google assigns to your website, and we shouldn't be wasting it. And again, that is then controlled by those two concepts of crawling and indexing. Understanding that good UX supports engagement, as well as kind of core web vitals when we talk about, you know, technical UX and not just making buttons red from green and that kind of thing. And, you know, focusing on that will then hopefully mean you see results, not only in engagement, but also in the search results. And then, we've kind of thrown it in there at the very end, but it's that, you know, tech and content must work together. They aren't, you know, completely siloed. Yes, they have their own activities which sit within each kind of workflow, within each sprint, but actually when they really harmonize, that's when you see the real benefit. And again, something we'll touch on in the next masterclass.
Yeah, and I think that's where we see the real performance sort of magic happen, if you like, because I think that when you're seeing tech and working hand in hand with content, you're really getting that double bounce, aren't you, which is really important. So I guess key technical issues. I'm conscious we've got sort of last 3 or 4 minutes, Jack, but the key technical issues that can block SEO growth. So I think we've touched on things like crawl and indexing, but, you know, a number of call outs on there. Yeah,
so again, the site speed performance piece, mobile usability, duplicate content for all the reasons we just talked about in terms of crawling and that kind of elements, internal linking and site structure. So again, are the pages that you're linking to the most relevant, the ones that you want people kind of in there and looking at? Redirects, you know, broken links. So again, putting requests in the site which are just wasting resource. Google, you know, requesting those pages and then not being there. Index exploit is something again kind of relates to crawling and indexing around, are we making Google crawl 9 pages out of 10 which just aren't relevant and we're not too bothered about? There's something we didn't touch on, but it is about JavaScript and actually how Google handles that in rendering. Again, that's probably a little bit too far for this session, but something which again, feel free to take away. You know, there's plenty of resource out there when we talk about, you know, JavaScript rendering and how that impacts the indexing queue and that kind of thing. But again, just some core concepts there and kind of key takeaways.
And a point I'd like to just highlight, because I think this is coming up in a lot of the conversations that we're having with both clients and prospects, is AI and using, for example, AI to produce masses of content. So we know it's probably never been easier to just produce content on a mass scale. But I think the key here really is understanding and thinking about those sort of key technical issues and the challenge that then just having loads of content that isn't actually unique or isn't essentially adding value, it counteracts a lot of these. It's more crawl budget. From an indexation perspective, there's more work to do there. You know, there's index bloat. Then you're thinking about redirect chains and broken links. So again, how does each one integrate with each other? So I guess a key flag for me is on this is like, sometimes less is more in this space. Like, don't just think, oh, well, I can now produce lots of content. And we will touch on this more next week, but it tees up next week quite nicely. For me, it's about really understanding these fundamentals as the context for which we'll then talk about content next week.
100%, yeah, exactly that. And even offsite as well, in terms of, like we said, about that authority piece and, you know, Google discovering your website from other places. It all ties together, which is obviously the...
That's why we're interested in SEO.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So I guess, you know, what I would say, conscious of time, but, you know, we can see a number of questions have came in, but we'll try, and what we'll do, like we did the last time, is we'll try and take those questions down and we'll try and answer those to support when we send out things like the video that we'll be producing on the back of the masterclass today. But again, what I'd ask is, there are a number of questions on that form, and the reason behind that really is so that we can give you more specific recommendations rather than it's just having a general conversation about, you know, for example, how are we performing technically? Well, the answer is it depends. Depends what you're built on, what your real issues are, where your pain points are. So we'll look to work with you on that. So again, do register via the link, and we'll be sending that out afterwards as well. I guess finally, just to tee up the future sessions that we've got. So we're back talking all things content in a couple of weeks' time. And then we've got a further couple of sessions on the back of that. But hopefully this has been a really useful session to really take you through those sort of fundamental concepts around technical SEO and ensuring that you've got the right building blocks in place. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us today. And again, we look forward to seeing you in the future session, but do reach out if you require an audit or have any further questions. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.